Week 7 of fantasy football is officially underway, and today I got you guys covered with my top 30 wide receiver rankings in the tier list format that I do every single week. My wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s, and my 5 favorite deep flex plays to help you guys get through these bye weeks. So if you guys enjoy, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your guys' biggest start-sit decision in the comment section. I will get to as many as possible prior to kickoff. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 40,000 subscribers. I appreciate you guys for that continued support. But with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, before I start off with my official top 30, I will be going through my will they play tier, and the general rule of thumb of a lot of these guys is that I would like to see at least one full practice between today or tomorrow, and if not, I would lean towards a lower ranked counterpart. The main guys on the will they play tier for this week starts off with Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. He practiced the last 2 days, and he is expected to suit up in this game against the Miami Dolphins on Sunday Night Football. So if you have Devontae Smith, he should be able to play, and if he does play, he is a top 15 overall wide receiver in my rankings this week. DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. You have to monitor his status. He's missed practice all week with his hip and rib issues. And like I mentioned off the top, if he logs a full practice and is ready to play, I'm cool starting him with top 20 level confidence. But he's someone to monitor, and if there's any setbacks or if he doesn't log a practice, I'd be willing to sit him in my lineup knowing he's dealing with these 2 injuries. Same thing with his teammate Tyler Lockett, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. Practiced in limited fashion on Thursday and is very similar to Metcalf in the sense that I'm just kind of waiting and seeing with them. And I'm mostly just monitoring his practice status and gauging the risk level if I do have him in regards to putting him in my lineup. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. He's listed as day-to-day, and he hasn't practiced all week with his shoulder issue. It's uncertain whether or not he's going to suit up for this game. Appears that his status is truly up in the air for this week. If I had to guess right now, I'd lean he probably suits up. But again, if that shoulder flares up, he could be in mix for another down performance, given the last few weeks he's had with battling injuries. But now we move on to the bye week team. Starting off with the Bengals, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins obviously not going to be able to play in this week, as well as Tyler Boyd. Cowboys on bye this week, so if you have CeeDee Lamb, he will not be able to enter your lineup. Same thing as it goes to the Titans if you have DeAndre Hopkins. The Jets are on bye as well if you have Garrett Wilson, Adam Thielen, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, all affected by bye weeks with the Panthers and Texans on bye as well. But now we head on to the official top 30 rankings of this week. Starting off with the wide receiver 1 to 6 range, my 3 favorite guys of this tier that I want to talk about are my wide receiver 2 on the week with Cooper Kupp going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. The Cooper Kupp we know and love has been taking the league by storm these last 2 weeks. He's posting nearly 24 PPR points per game, and since he's returned, he's commanded 42% of Matthew Stafford's targets. The consistent targets mixed in with the explosive plays that he's shown on display these last 2 weeks has gotten Kupp off to this scorching start, and as we know, the Rams are a really good offense. They're implied for 23 points, and with the Steelers being a bottom 7 team on the matchup chart against opposing wide receivers, Cooper Kupp should be in store for a big day. As we know with Cooper Kupp, his resume kind of speaks for itself, and he should consistently be ranked inside the top 4 wide receivers moving forward, assuming he continues to look like Cooper Kupp. Monter St. Brown, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions, ranks in as my wide receiver 4 this week, going on the road against the Baltimore Ravens. He had his blow-up game this past week, 12 receptions, over 120 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And while the Ravens do present an incredibly stingy matchup, ARSB's utilization is up there with some of the best wide receivers in the NFL. 29% target share on one of the best league offenses in the league with Detroit. And he's earned this high-end wide receiver 1 status given the volume that he has. And like I said, while the matchup does ding his overall ceiling, where he probably doesn't have another 30-plus PPR point outing, his floor is so high to the point where, while it's not a Cooper Kupp level floor, you know you're plugging him in. He's going to get 9 to 11 targets, and you're going to be satisfied with Monter St. Brown's performance. My wide receiver 4 on the week. And then we head on to the other Brown inside my top 6 with A.J. Brown, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Miami Dolphins at home on Sunday Night Football. He is my wide receiver 5 on the slate. And the reason why is the game environment and the way A.J. Brown's been playing himself lend him to being a high-end wide receiver 1. So in terms of the game environment, highest over-under of the entire slate, and what figures to be a shootout between 2 of the league's best offenses with Philadelphia and with Miami on the other side. The Eagles on their end, at home, implied for 27 points in this game. And A.J. Brown has really just separated himself from Devontae Smith in terms of production this year. Not to mention, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Devontae Smith is dealing with that hamstring injury. A.J. Brown, he's been on fire. He's commanding a high amount of the targets on this Eagles offense. And the Dolphins represent the third easiest matchup on the matchup chart against opposing wide receivers. As we know, both teams love to throw the football this year, and they are two of the fastest paced offenses in the NFL, meaning that we may just be in store for fireworks yet again. Miami ranking as the second team in neutral pass rate on the year. The Philadelphia Eagles ranking as the third team in neutral pass rate on the year. A.J. Brown is just set to explode in this matchup. I would not be shocked if he had another 25-plus PPR point outing. Wide receiver 7 to 12, we go on to Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. He comes in as my wide receiver 8 this week, going on the road to play the Minnesota Vikings, and he's truly just developed into a superstar wide receiver on an offense that scores over 30 points per game this year. His peripherals are up there with some of the best performing fantasy wide receiver ones in the NFL this year. As you guys see, his utilization next to two of my top 6 wide receivers, A.J. Brown and Keenan Allen, he actually outperforms both of them from a peripheral standpoint. And now he gets the 8th easiest matchup on the matchup chart in a game where San Francisco is implied for 25.5 points. Brandon Ayuk this year is averaging 16.4 PPR points per game. That includes a game that he only played 53% of the snaps, and another one where the game script got out of hand against my Dallas Cowboys. CMC and Deebo Samuel are banged up. Ayuk is a stud in his own right, and I think he's going to be a consistent wide receiver 1 moving forward, hence why I have him as my wide receiver 8. Puka Nacua, wide receiver of the LA Rams, goes to play the Pittsburgh Steelers at home and cranks in as my wide receiver 10 this week. I already mentioned just how elite Cooper Kupp is since he's rejoined the Rams, but Puka Nacua is still a damn good number 2 wide receiver and one of the most consolidated target shares in the entire NFL. And even with Cooper Kupp back, Puka Nacua is commanding over 29% of Matthew Stafford's targets. And if you actually do the math, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are combining for 71% of Matthew Stafford's targets. When Matthew Stafford is the starting quarterback for the Rams, you know that his first read and his second read are going to come down to Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, given the fact, like I said, they are commanding 71% of this Rams passing output in these last 2 weeks. While Kupp has proven, in my opinion, that he should be ranked as the pure one on this team, Puka Nacua has been very impressive. He is the best performing rookie wide receiver of the year, and he's still top 5 in the NFL in receiving yards for a reason. I do think, like I said, Cooper Kupp will be the one, but Puka Nacua has more than enough volume to be the consistent number 2 in that offense and a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. But moving on to my third and final wide receiver I'll discuss in this tier, we got Mike Evans cracking my top 12 as my wide receiver 12 this week, going to play the Atlanta Falcons at home in this matchup. Mike Evans, like I said, would typically be a wide receiver 2 in my rankings, but with the bye weeks and some injury question marks that we have going this week, he cracks the top 12 like I mentioned, and he's been good this year, albeit he's a little dependent on the big play, but he commanded 10-plus targets. He had 80+% of the snaps in his return after the bye week, after suffering that hamstring injury in week 4 against the New Orleans Saints. The Falcons have been very strong against opposing wide receivers, but I do think that Mike Evans has shown a massive weekly ceiling given his role on this Bucs offense, one of the most surprising offenses in the entire NFL to start this year, given what Dave Canales has done to support Baker Mayfield and improve the quarterback play that we expected. You need to start these guys like I mentioned in the intro. Now let's spend some more time on the guys ranked in the 13 to 30 range of my rankings. Starting off with my high-end wide receiver 2s, my wide receivers 13 and 14 on the week, were Calvin Ridley, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Christian Kirk, wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Coming up, like I said, 13 and 14 respectively, both playing the New Orleans Saints on Thursday Night Football. And if you watch the game, you know exactly what ended up materializing. Calvin Ridley, big time down performance, 1 reception for 5 yards on 4 targets. Christian Kirk, a really big performance, 6 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown on his 6 targets. Ridley is going to significantly drop in my rankings moving forward. Instead of the high-end, top 15 overall wide receiver I've been ranking him as in these last few weeks, I think given his level of involvement, he should be dropping at least to the low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 range. Whereas on the flip side with Christian Kirk, he has shown he has been this team's number 1 weapon. He's consistently involved. He's creating separation underneath from the slot. And obviously, as a result, he had another productive game against his New Orleans Saints. I think he's got to be considered a mid-range wide receiver 2 and ranked over Calvin Ridley moving forward. So when you see this installment next week for weekly rankings, you will know that Calvin Ridley will be below Christian Kirk moving forward. Wide receiver 15 is Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders going on the road to play the Chicago Bears. Jimmy G's absence will definitely hurt to a certain degree, but at the same time, Jacoby Myers has been extremely consistent all year. And now he plays against a Bears defense that ranks as the second easiest matchup on the entire matchup chart. And I understand that the range of outcomes for Jacoby Myers is extremely volatile, given the fact that the quarterback play of Aiden O'Connell or Brian Hoyer, whoever gets named the starter, will not be at the level of Jimmy Garoppolo. At the same time, the matchup, the consistency we've seen from Jacoby Myers all year has earned him the benefit of the doubt in my rankings. He's scoring 17.5 PPR points per game this year, and he has 3 games of over 10 targets and 2 games of over 20 fantasy points. Therefore, although there's some concerns, I'm starting him with wide receiver 2 level confidence. Wide receiver 16 for me this week is going to be Marquise Brown, wide receiver of the Arizona Cardinals, going on the road to play the Seattle Seahawks this week. Marquise Brown has quietly been a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy to start the year, and he's commanded 10 plus targets in 4 of his 6 games. Very similar to Myers in the sense that he's very much outperformed the expectation we had for him coming to the year. And I do think that given how well he's played, he should be considered as a fantasy wide receiver 2, like I said, moving forward. And the Seahawks have allowed the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers this year, and Marquise Brown has clearly earned the trust of Josh Dobbs in this offense. Wide receiver 17 for me is going to be Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns, going to play the Indianapolis Colts on the road this week. And Deshaun Watson's status is very much up in the air for this game, but Amari Cooper has been playing some of his best ball for the majority of the year, and he now gets the 5th easiest matchup on the matchup chart with the Indianapolis Colts. And Deshaun Watson's status does make him a volatile play, but if I knew he was healthy, Cooper would be a fringe wide receiver 1 for me in my rankings this week. So when I bake in the risk that in case he actually misses this game, I do think mid-range wide receiver 2 is an appropriate ranking when it comes to Amari Cooper. And the range of outcomes with Amari Cooper is as wide as everyone in his range. The ceiling is obviously massive given what we've seen from him this year, but at the same time, I do think that his floor could be similar to what we saw 2 weeks ago. And then finally, we got my wide receiver 18 of the week, and that's going to be Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, going to play the Detroit Lions at home this week. He's the wide receiver 22 on the year, and he's been a stud since his first game as a Baltimore Raven. The Ravens are implied for 23 points this week, and I do think that in this heavyweight matchup between the 4-2 Ravens and the 5-1 Lions, we should be able to see this offense get underway. And the ADOT for Zay Flowers has been low this year, but the fact that he commands this type of volume as a rookie, 48 targets in his first 6 games, makes him a high floor option on a week-to-week basis nonetheless. But moving off the high-end wide receiver 2s, we now move on to the low-end wide receiver 2s. Starting off with my start of the week, my wide receiver 19 for me is Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons, going on the road to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. And the reason why I'm all in on Drake London is the fact that he's commanded 21 targets and 36 PPR points in his last 2 games. And going up against a pass funnel Bucks defense, I think Drake London is in store for yet another game. He's commanding targets and has looked extremely acclimated to this offense, an offense that's been throwing the ball at a much higher rate this year compared to the rate we saw last year with Marcus Mariota and the first 6 games of Desmond Ridder's career. I think that London is poised to continue flying up the rankings. If he continues playing like he has these last 2 weeks, I wouldn't be shocked if he entered high-end wide receiver 2 status for me moving forward. Wide receiver 20 for me is DJ Moore, wide receiver of the Chicago Bears, going to play the Las Vegas Raiders at home this week. And with DJ Moore, obviously, he takes a huge hit in the rankings with the news that Justin Fields will be inactive for this game. But a 28% seasonal target share keeps him as a locked-in top 24 option for me. The ceiling is obviously capped due to the fact that Tyson Bagent is expected to start this game. But I do think that he earns enough volume to be a consistent top 24 level option for me, even without Justin Fields in the lineup. Wide receiver 21, Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, going to play the Atlanta Falcons at home this week. And his 2 best games of the season have come in consecutive weeks these past 2 weeks. And he now faces a matchup against the Falcons that, while they do good shutting down number 1 caliber wide receivers, they actually give up a ton of points to opposing wide receiver 2s. I think it's fair to say at this point that Mike Evans is the wide receiver 1 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and will be treated as such with A.J. Terrell by the Atlanta Falcons defense, hence opening up a lot more opportunity when it comes to Chris Godwin in this offense. He looks better. He looks the healthiest he has all year, and he's commanded 18 targets in his last 2 games versus only the 19 targets he commanded in the first 3 games for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You do the math, 9 targets per game versus about 7 per game in those first 3. He's continually getting more involved, and he's a guy that I think should be able to raise up these rankings if he continues stockpiling some good performances together. Wide receiver 22 is Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers, going on the road to play the Denver Broncos this week. And Christian Watson returned to a full-time role in week 5, logging 84% of the snaps and turning in 7 targets for 12.6 PPR points on that Monday Night Football game against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now he goes up against the 4th easiest matchup on the matchup chart against opposing wide receivers, in a game where Green Bay is implied for 23 points this week against Denver. I expect Christian Watson to continue raising up in these rankings, and I think in due time he will be considered a mid-range wide receiver too. Michael Pittman, wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts, goes to play the Cleveland Browns at home this week, and most weeks he would be much higher in these rankings. He's the wide receiver 16 on the season. He looks really good. He's consistently involved in this offense, but the reason why I have him all the way down at 23 is pretty simple. I think the Browns have the best defense in the NFL, and they are by far the hardest matchup on the matchup chart against opposing wide receivers to start the year. I'm willing to keep him as a top 24 option due to his consistent target involvement in this offense. He currently averages 10 targets per game, 60 targets in his 6 games played. But I do think that with Gardner Minshew starting and with Anthony Richardson out of the lineup, I have to dock him significantly given the cap ceiling he has in this matchup. Wide receiver 24 for me is Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders, going on the road to play the New York Giants this week. It's hard to get a read on the Commanders' wide receiver production on a week-to-week basis. However, I do think that it's fair to say Terry McLaurin is the clear-cut one in this core. 24% seasonal target share in a matchup against the Giants defense that he's historically dominated in these last few years. I understand if you have Terry McLaurin, he's been volatile all year, but I'm willing to trust him with low-end wide receiver 2 expectations going into this game against the division rival. But now I kick off my wide receiver 3s, and I start off with the Steelers duo themselves. George Pickens cranking in as my wide receiver 25. Deontay Johnson cranking in as my wide receiver 28 this week, with the Steelers going up against the Los Angeles Rams on the road this week. George Pickens has been an absolute stud in the absence of Deontay Johnson. With the hamstring issue he's battled through these last few weeks, in these last 3 games, George Pickens has gotten over 15 PPR points per game. And while Deontay's return may limit his overall production, it really just feels like the Steelers have taken the training wheels off of George Pickens. They're letting him run a full route tree. He's blossoming. He's developing as a young wide receiver. And he's still someone I want to be starting with top 30 level confidence, with a potentially higher ceiling if he can continue to show it, even with Deontay in the lineup. And then when it comes to Deontay Johnson, he would typically be in the will they play tier, but he's actually practiced in full these last 2 games, so I'm extremely confident that he will be playing this week, making his season return after getting hurt in week 1's game. He only logged 43% of the snaps in that game, but he did command 6 targets. Therefore, if he's able to fully make it through this game healthy, I do think he's in store for a monster target share this week. Wide receiver 26 is Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings, going to play the San Francisco 49ers at home this week. And with Jordan Addison, he saw his highest snap share of the season in lieu of Justin Jefferson's injury. He did command 86% of the snaps, and he has produced double-digit PPR points for the 5th time in 6 games this year. Addison's impressed, and with Justin Jefferson out for this game yet again, he'll need to continue stepping up for this Vikings offense if they have any hope of moving the ball against the San Francisco 49ers defense. And speaking of that defense, obviously it's a very tough matchup going up against San Francisco. I don't expect a very good game environment for the Vikings this week. At the same time, I trust a talented player on a good offense to be able to pay off on the full snaps he will receive this week, and that's exactly what Jordan Addison represents. Wide receiver 27 for me is Gabe Davis of the Buffalo Bills, going on the road to play the New England Patriots. Buffalo's big play threat has scored a touchdown in 4 of the 6 games this year and has scored 20 plus PPR points in 2 of his 6 games this year. And now he plays a banged up Patriots defense in a game where Buffalo is implied for nearly 25 points this week. I understand Gabe Davis is very volatile. He represents a very, very low floor, but at the same time, he's got the ceiling that is able to win you a week on his own right. Cortland Sutton, wide receiver of the Denver Broncos, goes to play the Green Bay Packers at home this week. He scored double-digit PPR points in 5 of his 6 games this year. And Green Bay, while they've been relatively stingy against the pass, this year, and the Broncos offense has not looked good these last few weeks, Cortland Sutton is a threat to score on any given week, given the fact that he scored 4 touchdowns in his 6 games. And typically, I think he profiles as more of a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4, but cracks the top 30 for me in my rankings this week due to the bye week apocalypse we are currently seeing on the wide receiver landscape. And finally, my wide receiver 30 of the week was Michael Thomas, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints. Obviously played in that Thursday night football game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, was able to produce 3 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown on the 7 targets that he commanded, going for 13.2 PPR points. So if you started Michael Thomas as a top 30 wide receiver, you were probably pretty happy with the 13.2 PPR point outing. But now we head on to the final segment of the video with my 5 Deeper League flex plays. Starting off with my number 1 Deeper League flex play with Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver of the New York Giants, going to play the Washington Commanders at home this week. He's commanded 20 targets in his last 3 games. Washington has been very bad against opposing wide receivers to start the season. And with Wan'Dale Robinson, he's earning the targets at a high rate. We just need to see a bump in his overall snaps. And if that's the case, I do expect him to be a 7, 8, 9 plus target per game player moving forward, given the lack of weapons in this Giants offense. Wide receiver 2 for me is Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. Goes on the road to play the Seattle Seahawks this week. And he played on 88% of the team snaps this week, which was his highest rate he's seen since week 1, where he commanded 90%. The target share is really the only concern for Michael Wilson right now, because on a per-target basis, he's been very good for this Arizona Cardinals offense. Wide receiver 3 for me is going to be Josh Palmer of the LA Chargers, going to play the Kansas City Chiefs at home. 15 targets for Josh Palmer in his last 2 games, and I think he is the clear-cut wide receiver 2 on the Los Angeles Chargers this week. We know that Keenan Allen's going to occupy the number 1 role, but I do think there's enough left of the pie for Josh Palmer to be able to produce. Justin Herbert was uncharacteristically bad against the Dallas Cowboys. I think he's going to bounce back in a big way against the division rival Chiefs this week, and what's expected to be the second highest over-under of the entire slate. Number 4 is going to be Curtis Samuel of the Washington Commanders. On the flip side of that Commanders-Giants matchup, going on the road to play the New York Giants. Double-digit PPR points for Curtis Samuel in 4 of his 6 games, and he scored a touchdown in his last 2 games, en route to averaging 12.6 PPR points per game. If you're in a weak spot, you have some bye weeks, I don't mind shoving Curtis Samuel into my lineup, knowing he's going to have a high floor in this game. And then finally, my number 5 is going to be Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver of the New England Patriots. And he's been productive in the games he's gotten a starting worthy snap share. 37 targets in those 3 games where he's gotten over 80% of the New England Patriots snaps. And he now faces a Buffalo defense that's down their best corner, with Trey White tearing his Achilles earlier in the year. If you have Kendrick Bourne, I don't mind him as a desperation top 45, top 50-ish level play at the wide receiver position. But either way, like I alluded to, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your biggest start-sit decision of the week. I will get to as many as possible. And, of course, subscribe to the channel. Also, if you want access to all these rankings and more, there is one of 2 ways you can access them right now. The first way, if you guys go over to Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FSC at checkout, you will get 100% match back on your deposit up to $100, as well as full access to our rest of the season and our weekly rankings manifesto. So don't miss out on that. And also, if you've already made an Underdog deposit, if you currently already have an Underdog account, the other way you can access it is by going over to flockfantasy.com and using promo code FSC for 30% off either the Flocker or the Mother Flocker packages. And from there, if you do sign up on the site, you will have access to all of these rankings. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in your matchups. Hopefully you guys secure the W's.